Okay, my number 1300 66 1251. There's going to be a signing of a memorandum of understanding, an MOU between us and the Charles Sturt University. The Mayor, Matthew Dickinson. Morning, Mayor.
Good morning, Richard.
Good morning. I didn't know we didn't have an understanding with the CSU.
Well, it's interesting. We used to have a formal understanding with CSU. We used to have an MOU, and for whatever reason, that expired and was never re-signed again. And it doesn't mean that suddenly we didn't like each other, but it just means there wasn't a formal arrangement. And one of the great things about an MOU is it sets out some various things that both parties will do in an MOU, and just actively working with each other and just even having meetings with each other. So that hasn't happened for a couple of years now. I was very keen to see that happen again. It went through council, through the May meeting of council, the MOU, and some discussions before that, obviously. And so the formal signing of that is today. But really, it's just about trying to work with each other. And having a university in Dubbo, in fact, we've got 2 universities in Dubbo, but having Charles Sturt here is a really important part for Dubbo, for our economic development, for keeping some of our students local rather than having them go off to other areas to be educated and then we lose them forever, and attracting people here. When people look at where they might move, if they're looking to move out of Sydney, for example, they do look at places where they can get their children a good education, where they can get a university education, good high schools, private high schools, a whole range of things. But not having a university is certainly something that's absolutely detrimental to a regional city. So having it there, let's work with them and see how we can maximise the benefits.
Absolutely. I'm amazed that it was let slide or wasn't even considered as a good partnership. I always assumed, and you should never assume anything or trust anyone, but I always assumed that we had this strong connection from this CSU. As you say, it's a magnet for those who want to move to the bush, and they say, oh, there's the Charles Sturt Uni's there, that's good, we can do courses there. So you're going to sign it officially today. Is there a sunset in the signing, or do you have to do it all the time, or what? How does that work?
No, normally we have a 5-year agreement in place, and obviously you want that to be ongoing, but with any agreement, you don't want it to just be ongoing because you want to review that on a regular basis, and you can review it at any time and you can make those changes. But having a date on it, say for example 5 years, it means that in 5 years' time, if you haven't had a good look at it during that time frame, then you might say, well, let's look at this agreement again and see if it's been working for us and how can we change it and modify it. So I think it makes sense to have that agreement in place so that you do then review it and go forward.
I agree. That's happening at the Charles Sturt University around about an hour from now. Matthew Dickinson, the other thing I wanted to address with you was the rugby league. We've had a couple of visits over the last 2 seasons. Very recently, of course, South's paid a visit to us. What's going to happen next year and the year after and the year after that?
I don't know. That's one thing that we'll have to work on. It actually went through the council meeting last week that the post-event report came through. And so one thing that most people don't realise is that when you get a game to a regional area, and it obviously has happened for many years now, the club that comes out and plays that game is paid a large sum of money. And in our case, it was $350,000 that we paid to South Sydney, plus some of the other sponsorship money that we achieve just talking to various companies who want to be part of it, have a tent, a VIP area there or some other area there. Whatever sponsorship money is gained from that, half of that is paid to the club as well. So when South Sydney came along and brought the game to the bush, then there was a sum of money that was probably pretty close to $400,000 that they went away with. Now, you had Dougal Saunders on a moment ago. $150,000 was provided through the state government, and Dougal Saunders was part of that to help that contribution. So that meant the contribution that council had to make was significantly less. In our post-event report, which went through council last week, that showed us the information from that and the financial outcome from that. So we ended up spending, or of ratepayers' money, it ended up costing us $67,000, which is still a not insignificant sum of money. Now, what did we get for that? Well, it was fantastic. 11,124 people came along to the game. $2.8 million was injected into our economy. 52% of people that purchased tickets came from outside the LGA. So there were lots of good benefits and lots of things that are positives from that. But going forward, what we resolved at the council meeting was, yes, we'll go and negotiate with South Sydney and any other NRL club that we might wish to speak with about next year's game, but it's not a given that we'll have it because the $150,000 from the state government is not a given for next year. And then if you take that out and suddenly the game costs you $217,000 based on this year's figures, that becomes a pretty hard argument to have with the community to say we're going to take $217,000 out of the pocket of the ratepayers. money that could have gone into roads, patching roads, money that could have gone into footpaths, or whatever else you might want in the community. And that's going to go to a game that, yes, it does inject money into our economy. It does help businesses, hospitality, accommodation providers, that type of thing. But ultimately, that's still $217,000 that council doesn't have in its bottom line or on its bottom line. Is that the best thing to do? So we'll go away, do some negotiations with some NRL clubs, bring that back to council. By the end of August, we have to have a final decision because the NRL needs to know where games are being played, what might happen with the draw for next year, for example. So that's one of the conditions. So we've got to make that decision by the 31st of August. The $150,000 from the state government may or may not come through, but we won't know that until next year. So we've got to make a decision based on that not being there.
So you're going to do something like an auction?
Well, we'll go and talk to a few clubs, and we'll talk to clubs and show them the success of this year's game and last year's game, talk to them about the benefits of coming to Dubbo, and then see if we can get a deal from someone. Now, South Sydney will go to first because they've already been here for 2 years. But I don't want to say what my decision would be, but I think we've really got to work on trying to get a better outcome for the community than costing us potentially $220,000.
Well, going back to that, it's all very well to say, okay, $2.5 million went into the economy, but they were individual private enterprises, hotels and accommodation and eateries and like. But you didn't get any, we didn't get any of that money, did we?
No, that's exactly right. We sold tickets for the
pockets.
That's right. We sold tickets for the game. We kept the money from those ticket sales, and with the cost of putting the event on, the cost of paying South Sydney, and there's other costs associated with it as well, then again, out of all that, yes, council lost $67,000. So if I was a promoter, if I said, I'm going to go and promote a game and I'm a private promoter and I'm going to pay for all this, then I just lost $67,000 on the promotion. Now, South, from our perspective, council's perspective, it's not always about making money because it's for the community. So for the community, yes, we created $2.8 million for the community.
But you're not a charity, are you?
Well, we're not a charity, and we've still got ratepayers to be concerned about, and we've got people who aren't interested in rugby league. We've got people who just want their roads patched. We've got people who say, well, why do you bring rugby league? Why don't you bring the opera? Why don't you bring an artist? Why don't you bring something different to Dubbo? Why are you spending money on just rugby league? So there's a whole range of arguments. We'll have to consider all that by the end of August.
So what, the highest bidder will get it? You're going to give up first option to Souths, obviously, because they've been here for 2 years. Then put it up for auction. Well, the highest bidder gets it.
I'd go the lowest bidder, Richard. I'd go the other way. I'd say who's going to make what costs us the least amount of money, and that still doesn't guarantee it will happen because then councillors will still have to make a decision based on, okay, we've been able to negotiate with Club X and we've worked out the cost to the community will be in the vicinity of, let's call it 50,000, 100,000, whatever it might be. Do we go ahead with it? And then councillors will need to make that decision. And I'm sure there'll be lobbying from the community in both ways. People that love their sport will say, definitely bring it, it's great. And people who say, well, I don't really care about the sport, but maybe we should be promoting that money or using that money to promote something else, might argue differently. And then councillors, as we do, will have to make a decision based on that.
By August, you say?
At the end of August, we have to have something in place if we're going to go ahead next year. That's when the NRL needs that information.
Interesting time between now and then. You've got a couple of months to mull over that and to see what comes into our league world for next year.
Yeah, exactly.
Very interesting subject. Matthew Dickinson, Mayor of Dubbo Regional Council, thanks for your time this morning. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Richard.